Welcome back to Ranking Every Kansas Album. If you haven't seen the first video, go ahead and check that out before this one. And now, to the countdown. Numbers 10 through 5 will be on this list. Number 10, Native Window. While this isn't a Kansas album per se, it is an album made by 4 members of the current lineup of Kansas. Rich Williams, Phil Ehart, Billy Greer, and of course, Dave Ragsdale. During a time when the band wasn't making any albums, just releasing live ones and compilation albums. And these 4 members of the band wanted to make an album. They were getting tired of... It'd been 8 years since they'd really recorded an album. And it'd be another 7 until they actually recorded one as Kansas once again. And so, they were like, Steve, you want to write some songs? We wanted to do an album. Steve really didn't want to. He was kind of dumb by this point. I think the only reason he might have been in the band... money, probably. I mean, I have no doubt he enjoyed it, but he just didn't want to make a studio album. Kerry, he was pretty busy writing stuff for Protocol, recording some guitar parts for the Mastodon album 3, later re-released as Revolution of Mind by John Elefante, and then he had a stroke, so that kind of sucks. So, what did the 4 members of the band do? They decided, we're going to make our own spin-off band / album. They co-produce it along with Steve Rolls and get a lot of outside songwriters, and wow, what an album. To begin with, the production is top-notch. I mean, Kansas they always manage to get great sounding albums in regards to the mix, and this one is especially prominent. With the violin just pretty much dominating each of the songs, the drumming is very noticeable, simplistic by Kansas standards, but Phil's work is just so precise. Rich's acoustics, like he uses a lot of acoustic guitar on this one, is great. Even when he gets to shred with the electric guitar, it still sounds great. And we actually get to hear Billy's bass from time to time. The best thing the production brings out, though, is the vocals, specifically the harmonies from Billy, Dave, and a lot of in-studio musicians. And Billy does all the lead vocal lines, with the exception of The Way You Haunt Me, which Dave actually does, and they've got identical voices, and I had to actually look this up. It's like, wait, what? I could have swore that was Billy singing that. Yeah. And the background harmonies are also great. They add a lot of layers to the song. The songwriting, well, they didn't write every song. They co-wrote nearly all of them. It's pretty solid, if a bit kind of inconsistent from here. Sometimes it's going to be a rocker, sometimes acoustic ballad. Speaking of which, the majority of the songs have the most unique sounding, like, they just sound so weird. It's like rock, bluegrass, but not country rock, because it's not country rock, just trust me on that. Pop, some AOR, and some artistic flavors here and there, like Money. Just cannot figure out what it is. Like, the labels for music are sometimes hard to figure out. I'll call it Americana art rock until I can come up with a better term. Much like Billy Joel's 70s output, for the most part, is what I call piano-led jazz pop. Much like Power, it's better that it's probably a one-album experience of this unique sound that the band never does, especially considering what came after. Number 9, Monolith. So, this is the penultimate album by the classic lineup, the one before Audiovisions. And this is the one that's generally seen as the other downfall, like, fall from grace for the band. This is a little unfair, I think. As well, yes, they do get a bit more commercial. It's more of a matter of they just lose a lot of the keyboard textures and that they had in Point of No Return, and replace the shorter songs with longer songs, so it's almost balanced out, but it is more hard rock than progressive this time around, I do say. Is that a bad thing? No, because it's actually really great, and the progressive tracks are amazing. Angels Have Fallen, On the Other Side, Glimpse of Home, great, and yeah, this is the... There's even a track that's almost got a slight disco vibe, maybe. I wouldn't call it total disco, but People of the Southwind, the way it sounds. It's like a dance track. The reason it doesn't rank higher, though, is, well, this was a divergence of the sound Kansas had kind of produced. And some of the songs are noticeably a lot better than others. Carrie's contributions, for example, definitely work better, whereas Steve's, they're great. They're still solid, and I'm actually one of the few that is a big fan of How My Soul Cries Out For You, mostly for that drum breakdown, though. I mean, props to Phil, that awesome drum breakdown. It's ultimately an album that the band kind of went in like, alright, we can easily make another hit like Point of No Return, but with slightly less effort put in. That said, the production is still great, the first album that the band actually produced, and the musicianship is top-notch as usual. Carrie having some great lead lines and riffs and solos. Steve's vocals are really solid. They could actually be better than... Sometimes I would say that Steve's vocals are better here than they are on Point of No Return. Other times, like certain tracks, you know. Robbie's violin, although slightly less noticeable now, still contributes to a lot of the songs. His lead singing is great, especially on Stay Out of Trouble, which is just an awesome tune. And then you got Dave Hope's bass playing, which is, once again, less... Each album, it seems, gets less noticeable in the classic albums. But, well, starting with Point of No Return, it gets less noticeable in the mix for each album. But this is a debut production by the band. More likely than not, mostly Carrie as well as Phil. By later albums and solo careers, anyway. Interestingly, this would be the last studio album to go platinum. But does that mean that everything that came after was crap? No. Does this make it a bad album for being a sellout? Because it's a great album for fans of hard rock, prog, AOR, just a good album all around that anyone should listen to, a must-buy. Really great. Number 8, the Prelude Implicit. So, I did a review on this. It's a horrible, horrible review. But you should kind of check it out for slightly more expanded thoughts on the song track list as a whole. You can no doubt tell I kind of prefer that album a little bit, because this is ranked lower, but there is a reason for that. This album feels like it hasn't, like, there are some tracks which, to be a progressive rock band, you have to progress with the times and be complex with your music. Also, make sure it doesn't stay totally the same throughout. And as such, songs like The Unsung Heroes and Rhythm in the Spirit kind of delve into different genres. The former being almost a piano ballad, like something you'd probably hear by Ray Charles or Elton John. The latter mixing some kind of R&B and pop vocal effects, and maybe some slight progressive metal leanings in regards to the shredding. The first half of the album in general feels a bit more radio-friendly, whereas the second half is where it really kicks in with the hard rocking and progressive sound of Kansas. And no doubt you can tell which side of the album I prefer. I do prefer the second half, although I gotta give respect to the first half for trying some new stuff. Like, With This Heart, it's a very commercial track, the first single released, if you will, and despite that, it's got some very progressive stuff, like the drumming. The bass drumming is just... The timing itself is actually rather complex if you pay close enough attention to it. And of course, the band actually took some of the stuff that they did with Native Window, the whole-out violin shredding, almost like it's a guitar, they put into a lot of the songs, such as Rhythm in the Spirit, yeah, that was one of them, Unsung Heroes and With This Heart. They also do some rather traditional stuff with a violin-led song, which would be more in the vein of classical music, most notably with Section 60, which also has prominent drums and piano and guitar. And it's my second favorite track off the album, and a great tribute to those that have fought, served, and fallen in the Middle East. Possibly the most emotional, after you learn that it was written for those people. Favorite track, not surprisingly though, is the progressive masterpiece, The Voyage of 818. And the reason why, it actually kind of got better after really listening to it, because The Voyage of 818, it's a voyage of the specific sounds Kansas have had in 8 minutes and 18 seconds. Like, there's bits that sound like the piano, like the verses with Ronnie singing and playing piano are similar to that of the Pinnacle, or just Mask in general. Somber, piano, and vocal driven. But then when the instrumentals kick in, it's interesting, because the more keyboard savvy stuff, it sounds like it could be a Moog or an ARP. I don't know specific keyboard sounds. I'm not that aficionado. There are bits that sounds like Song for America, then there's some awesome organ that really sounds like Point of No Return. The whole guitar, very reminiscent of Icarus 2 from Somewhere to Elsewhere. Many of the albums are served brilliantly with that song alone. And if no wonder it's practically the crown jewel of the album in many people's eyes. That's only a tiny bit of stuff I can just gush over the tracks about. And that was my favorite one that I had to kind of limit myself in order to talk about other things like the production, which this is probably the best sounding Kansas album ever. Production-wise, it's just clear. Everything can be heard, like Billy's bass playing, which is probably at his best now that I can hear it for once. Rich and Zach Rizvi's twin lead guitar work, although Rich probably takes a lot of the lead. It's great to hear twin leads once again, a staple of the classic albums. David Mannion's keyboard work is just amazing. He could easily rival Carey and Steve. One of him, so really he could probably rival someone like Tony Banks, but not quite Rick Wakeman or Keith Emerson in my eyes. Dave's violin is very virtuistic, and probably rivals that of Steinhardt's, and of course, Phil's drumming, the secret weapon of the band, is great, as usual. A must-buy and must-listen for anyone. Number 7, we have Vinyl Confessions, the first of 2 albums with John Elefante on lead vocals. Following Audiovision, Steve and Carey had one of the most volatile in-band relationships ever, like up there with Paul McCartney and John Lennon, but not quite the level of Axl Rose and everyone in Guns N' Roses. And, well, eventually, Steve was like, I quit. In fact, it was the line, till you face the one who rose from Crossfire, that really made him kind of quit. And that's the one demo off the Vinyl Confessions demo tapes that Robbie got full lead on. So actually great material off the tapes, most of it which would end up on the album, some of which didn't. I actually would be curious if the band ever reused some of their old demo songs for a new album, or just re-released the demos but cleaned up the production. Back on track though, the band decided to get a new lead vocalist because, yeah, they really needed one. And it came down to 3 people: Michael Gleason, Warren Ham, and John Elefante. Naturally, they chose John Elefante, although Michael Gleason and Warren Ham would both be brought onto AD by Kerry Livgren, like a year or 2 later. And both served as sidemen for the 2 Elefante tours. With that said, Elefante's hired. He brings in 3 new songs, co-written with his brother, co-writes one with Kerry, and they record the rest of the album. However, the one demo that didn't... Well, the one song that wasn't a demo that ends up on the album, Play the Game Tonight. Interestingly enough, one of the last big Kansas hits. Definitely one of the better songs off the album. Very commercial, but, like, hold on, but very catchy nonetheless. Because Kerry has a knack for songwriting and somehow writing a hit. Somehow! The guy that writes Song for America. The other standout tracks of the album include Chasing Shadows, the acoustic piano ballad that the Elefante brothers wrote, Windows, a nice rocker with some great soloing in the middle, Borderline, Face It, and Play On are all 3 great tracks in my opinion. And, of course, the closing number, Crossfire. Just around 6 minutes long, it's the most Kansas track out of the bunch. and it's really good, very progressive, and it's a shame that the album wasn't made up with more of these, although this album just has a personal place in my heart, even if it is probably not as technically good as some of the other albums, like Monolith or Prelude Implicit. It's a fact, it just isn't. But with ranking videos, it's what the person making the video thinks in regards to ranking this. You can disagree with me, I just like it. It hits home personally because of the lyrics, and because it was, well, the DVD is awesome, and there's something about it, it's special in that way. It's not my favorite, obviously, because it's literally not even it's in the middle. But when it hits a special place in your heart, you gotta put it higher up than even albums you'd probably recommend more than this. That said, though, I still do recommend it. It's a good album. Musicianship is top-notch as usual. The guitars are, like, the double guitar work is especially brilliant here. Just listen to Fair Exchange. It's full of, like, guitar battles and solos. And, yeah, just listen to it. It's a good listen. Not overly complex, but good. Number 6, Kansas. The one that started it all. The one that started it all. 6 guys from Kansas back in 1973 and 4. They get a record deal. They go to New York, record it. There's a whole lot of history before and after this, and I would recommend watching Miracles Out of Nowhere, the documentary released just last year about this. It's great. It's really informative. It's a great documentary. But back to the album. After, well, coming together and recording this, it kind of stalls. And it's really just... This album is very flawed, but it also is absolutely brilliant. It's probably the most unique Kansas album in that it's got a lot of southern rock, boogie rock, and some blues rock in regards to tracks like Can I Tell You and Bringing It Back. It's so unique in that regard, and yet it also has tracks like Biloxi's, Journey from Mary Braun, Death of Mother Nature's Sweet, which really show off what the band would later do. And just from their debut, you know this is an awesome band. They don't know quite what they're doing yet, as it's very jarring. And even the progressive stuff is very influenced by the music of, well, the region they're from, which really isn't saying much. Like, what else does Kansas have other than Kansas? Toto? Okay, I'm kidding, of course. I have no idea where Toto's from, but the point is, they were influenced both by their respective American peers in regards to southern rock, boogie rock, blues rock, and their European progressive counterparts, and that's what makes Kansas so unique. Sure, the American influences are much more evident here, even on the progressive stuff, where they just let that violin rip, which is why I still consider Robbie Steinhardt to be a slightly better violinist than Dave Ragsdale. But hey, that's just my opinion. And, well, as the debut, it sets the bar for all those to come, and it's interesting that it's just barely in the upper half. It's like around the middle. And it's kind of good that the band at least has 5 more albums that are better than this. Which, to be fair, not quite a masterpiece, but a brilliant album. And to follow this up, hey, I'll admit, you guys did good, making this and then managing to top it. Some bands would dream of having an album this good and unique. This is from a very bipolar album that shows the trappings of what the band could be, so much so that they really sounded a lot more like bands like Yes and Genesis with the release of Song for America, before slightly going back to this sound a little bit more with Mask. Partly because the Song for America barely did any better, and, well, critics just didn't understand Kansas. Critics generally don't understand prog rock in general, but the fact that they can't understand the mix of prog rock and the American sound, which defines Kansas, it baffled them. It really did. They're like, it's a crap band. It's even going so far as to say they're like Styx on some of their later stuff. Fair enough criticism there. If it's audio vision I'm referring. Maybe not keyboard savvy, but even in retrospective reviews, Kansas has often been looked over or called the band with only like 2 known songs, and the only good music group to come out of Kansas, which ain't saying much. AllMusic gave their debut a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and generally most of the band albums they've given like a 3, saying the music doesn't go anywhere despite how unique it sounds. I disagree, but it's opinionated, it's music. And ultimately that's why we love Kansas. And that's why it's at 6. So, stay tuned for part 3.